Okay, let's get into this. Picture this. We're looking back, way back, millions of years in South Africa.
Right. Two different ancient human relatives.
Exactly. And what's kind of mind-blowing is that even though they lived, ages apart, the tiny details inside their finger bones, well, they're telling us new things.
Yeah, new secrets about how our ancestors handled their world. Things like picking up small objects, but also...
Literally hanging on, right? Climbing.
Climbing. It really makes you wonder, what can the sort of hidden structure of these old fingers tell us about their lives?
And about the evolution of our own dexterity, our hands. It's incredible.
Well, it's fascinating, I think, is this whole puzzle of how early human relatives actually managed it all, using their hands for so many different tasks.
It wasn't just about making the first tools.
No, not at all. They needed to prep food and, crucially, just get around, moving in their environment.
Which often meant climbing trees or maybe rocks.
Definitely involved climbing. And that old idea, the simple story of we stood up straight, then we started making complex tools. It's just proving to be way too simple.
Yeah, much more complex. And that's really what we're diving into today. We've got this new study, and it takes a super close look inside the finger bones.
Right, the internal structure.
From two really key hominin fossils, both from South Africa. We're talking Australopithecus sediba, lived about 2 million years ago, and then Homo naledi, much later, maybe around 250,000 years ago. A bit of an enigma, that one.
And it's important. As you said, neither of these were found, right next to a pile of tools.
No toolbox, nope. But the shape of their hands, their wrists, it suggests they had, a level of control, fine motor skill.
Something more than chimps or gorillas have.
Exactly.
And connecting this to the bigger picture,
yeah,
even without direct tool evidence, the hand shape itself, the morphology, it poses really key questions. What could they do?
Yeah, what were they capable of? And this research you mentioned, it's highlighted in Science Daily.
Yes, based on work from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. And it was published in Science Advances. It gives us a fresh angle, a new way to sort of decode their lives from the bones themselves.
Okay, so let's properly introduce the stars here. These ancient hands. First up, Australopithecus sediba.
Sediba, found in Malapa back in 2010. Dates to around 2 million years ago.
And the really exciting find there was that nearly complete hand skeleton, right? MH2.
Yeah, MH2. Found with other parts of the skeleton, too, which is fantastic for context.
Crucial context. But it's important to remember, sediba wasn't fully human-like, hand-wise or otherwise.
Oh, absolutely not. While the hand has some surprisingly modern features, sediba also retained a lot of ape-like characteristics, particularly in the upper limbs.
Shoulders, arms.
Right. And that keeps the debate alive. Were they actively climbing, or are those just, leftover traits from an ancestor who lived more in the trees?
Still up for debate. Okay, then we have Homo naledi.
Naledi. Yeah, they made quite a splash in 2015, found deep in the Rising Star Cave system.
Such a strange context for a find. And these fossils are much younger, around 250,000 years old.
Relatively speaking, yes. And the discovery included a hand skeleton, they called it Hand 1.
Aptly named.
Found with this huge collection of other bones. Many individuals mixed together.
And just like sediba, naledi also has those intriguing ape-like features in the upper limbs. Again, hinting at climbing.
Suggesting climbing, yes. Or at least some role for the upper limbs in locomotion beyond just walking.
Which brings us to the core of the study, looking inside the finger bones.
This is where it gets really clever. The researchers, led by Samar Syeda, they focused on the internal structure, specifically the cortical bone.
Cortical bone. That's the dense outer layer, the hard shell.
Exactly, the strong shell. And what's crucial here is that bone isn't static. It's living tissue. It remodels itself during life based on the forces, the loads it experiences.
So areas under lots of stress get thicker.
They tend to get thicker, denser, and areas with less stress might become thinner. Bone adapts.
Wow, so it's like the bone itself kept a diary of how they used their hands.
Okay, let's zero in on Australopithecus sediba's hand first. What did its bony biography reveal?
Well, what's really interesting with sediba is that its hand shows a genuine mix. You could call it a mosaic, really. Ape-like and human-like traits, right there in the internal finger bone structure.
A mosaic? How so?
From most of the fingers' digits 2, 3, and 4, the way that dense cortical bone was distributed, especially in the bones closest to the palm, the proximal phalanges, and the middle bones, the intermediate phalanges, it was actually pretty similar to what you see in apes, meaning the bone tended to be thicker on the palm side, along these ridges where the finger-bending tendons run. the flexor sheath ridges.
Okay, so mostly ape-like in those middle fingers, but you said a mix.
Yes, because here's where it gets really interesting. The thumb and the pinky finger bones told a totally different story.
Ah, how were they different?
Their internal structure showed a pattern much more like ours, more human-like.
So the conclusion there is, the researchers concluded that these two digits, thumb and pinky, were likely doing more of the manipulation work because they probably weren't bearing as much weight or stress during climbing.
And that fits with other things we know about sediba's hand, doesn't it? Like the thumb itself.
Perfectly. Acety had this remarkably long, quite human-like thumb. It really paints a picture of a hand that was, capable of both. Dexterous tasks, maybe tool use.
But still needed for climbing?
Exactly. Still adapted for climbing.
But I remember reading it wasn't a particularly strong hand, maybe? Quite flexible.
You're right. The study found Acety's hand wasn't very rigid. It had low resistance to bending and twisting.
More like
what you see in orangutans, actually, who are obviously very adept climbers.
And why was it so flexible?
Likely due to a combination of factors. The finger bones themselves were quite curved, and they had those well-developed flexor sheath ridges we mentioned.
Wow, the ridges again?
Yeah, they actually help distribute the forces when the fingers are flexed, reducing strain on the bone itself. It makes the system more compliant, more flexible.
So, okay, a flexible hand for climbing, but with a thumb and pinky setup suggesting some kind of manipulation. How does this mesh with the rest of a sediba's skeleton?
Well, that's the crucial question, isn't it? How did the whole system work together? If you look inside the wrist bones, at the spongy bone.
The trabecular bone.
Yes, the trabecular bone. In the wrist bone called the capitate, it suggests a mix. Human-like loading patterns, maybe from object manipulation.
Okay.
But combined with ape-like wrist postures, possibly used during climbing or suspension.
A mix again.
Yeah.
And the hand bones themselves, the metacarpals.
Similar story. The trabecular bone there suggests a grasping style more akin to orangutans.
And the upper limb. Shoulders, arm length.
Those also show features consistent with climbing adaptations. Longer arms, shoulder joint shape.
Okay, so putting it all together for Sediba, it really sounds like this hand was, well, a jack of both trades, master of, maybe neither entirely, good at climbing, capable of some skillful manipulation.
Precisely. That seems to be the picture emerging. The human-like signals in the thumb and the fifth digit, the pinky, might indicate specific grips, maybe like a five-jaw chuck grip or a power squeeze using those outer digits.
But maybe not with the same force as later humans.
Probably with less force than some other hominins, yes. And always within the context of a hand that was still very much adapted for arboreal locomotion, for moving in the trees.
And you mentioned this pattern is different from other South African finds.
Yes, that's an important point. The patterns in Acediba's finger bones seem distinct from, say, Australopithecus africanus or the hominin fossils from Swartkrans Cave. Their hand bones generally show a stronger signal related to locomotion, less of this manipulation hint.
That's really fascinating. Okay, let's switch gears. Homo naledi. What about its unique way of gripping things? What did the bones of this, more recent but still enigmatic hominin reveal?
Right, naledi. What's immediately striking is that its hand bone structure is really quite different. Not just from Sediba, but from other known hominins too. It's doing its own thing.
How so? What's the pattern there?
Well, if you look at the proximal phalanges, those are the finger bones connecting to the palm.
Got it.
They show a human-like signal with thicker bone on the back of the finger, the dorsal side. But, and this is the weird part, they also have that ape-like thickening on the palm side, the volar side.
Wait, both? Thicker bone on the back and the palm side. That sounds counterintuitive.
It is unexpected. It's a bit of a puzzle. And the middle finger bones, the intermediate phalanges, they just add to the complexity.
Okay, what do they show?
They show more of a straightforward ape-like pattern. Thicker bone predominantly on the palm side.
So a human-like and ape-like mix near the palm, then mostly ape-like in the middle segment.
Exactly. This combination suggests H. naledi was loading its fingers, putting stress on different parts of its finger bones in ways that are pretty unusual compared to other hominins or modern humans or apes.
So what on earth could explain that? Such an unusual loading pattern.
Okay, here's where it gets really intriguing again. The researchers drew a parallel to something modern humans do. Crimp grips.
Crimp grips, like rock climbers use.
Precisely, rock climbers. When a climber uses a crimp grip, they put a lot of their weight onto their fingertips, but the middle joints of their fingers are bent sharply, flexed, while the end joints near the fingertips are extended, sometimes even hyperextended.
I can picture that intense pressure on the fingertips.
Very intense. And interestingly, H. naledi also had unusually curved finger bones, which could potentially help accommodate or facilitate that kind of grip.
So are they suggesting Homo naledi was rock climbing 250,000 years ago?
Well, it's a provocative idea. It's certainly suggestive. The curved phalanges, this unique internal bone structure consistent with crimp loading, it points towards the possibility of habitual climbing, perhaps specifically on rock faces rather than just trees.
That would be amazing. But still speculative at this point.
Oh, definitely. We need more research to confirm if H. naledi really did use crimp-like grips habitually, and if that was linked to climbing rocks in the Rising Star cave system or elsewhere. But the bone structure is making us think about it.
And we shouldn't forget the thumb, right? Did Naledi's thumb also show anything interesting?
Good point. Yes, H. naledi's thumb also shows human-like features. Like sediba, it suggests a potentially strong, capable thumb, one that could likely perform human-like manipulations.
So another mix, a dexterous thumb, but fingers potentially specialized for this crimp grip, maybe for locomotion?
It seems that way. A very interesting combination.
Okay, can you just unpack the biomechanics a bit more? How would using a crimp grip actually lead to that specific bone pattern? Thick on the back, near the palm, thick on the palm side in the middle.
Right. So think about that crimp position. It creates huge forces through the flexor tendons, the ones that bend your fingers. This puts a lot of stress on the little pulleys, the annular ligaments, that hold those tendons close to the bone, especially on the palm side of the middle phalanx. That could explain the thickening there.
Right, pressure on the palm side, middle bone.
Then, for the bone closer to the palm, the proximal phalanx, when you crimp hard, especially a full crimp with the end joint hyperextended, there's tension created on the back, the dorsal side of that bone.
Ah, tension on the back.
Exactly. And bone responds to both pressure and tension. So that increased tension on the back of the proximal phalanges might explain the thicker cortical bone seen there in H. naledi.
That makes sense. It really paints a picture, doesn't it? How these specific behaviors could literally shape the skeleton over time.
It absolutely does. And it really drives home the point that this wasn't some simple straight path towards just getting better at making tools.
Yeah, that linear progression idea just seems completely busted now.
It really does.
Yeah.
The different solutions we see in A. sediba and H. naledi, there's strong evidence that human evolution involved a lot of, well, different evolutionary experiments.
Trying out different ways to balance things.
Exactly. Balancing the need for dexterity, for manipulation, with the absolute necessity of moving effectively through whatever environment they lived in. Different times, different places, different strategies.
So just to kind of wrap up the key findings here, for A. sediba, the internal bone structure points towards a life-balancing climbing with some manipulation, maybe using the thumb and pinky more for grasping.
A climber with some dexterity.
Then you have Homo naledi showing this really unique pattern, possibly linked to a specialized grip like crimping, maybe for climbing.
Yeah, perhaps rock climbing.
Alongside a thumb that looks pretty capable for manipulation too.
Right. A different kind of compromise, a different adaptation.
And if we zoom out, look at the bigger picture, this research really underscores just how diverse the adaptations were among our ancient relatives.
Completely. The evolution of the human hand wasn't one single story. It was complex, messy, with multiple pathways to solving the problems of survival.
And those features that maybe look primitive to us, the ape-like traits.
They weren't just leftovers. They were likely functionally important, serving a real purpose in their lives.
Yeah. Which leaves you thinking, given all these different ways our ancestors found to, get a grip on their world, how might those early varied adaptations have ultimately shaped where we ended up? The trajectory of later tool use, our own amazing manual dexterity today.
It's a great question. What unexpected skills, or maybe what specific environmental pressures, drove these different evolutionary paths? Did naledi's potential climbing skills influence other aspects of its behavior or anatomy?
It's just amazing to think how these tiny details, the internal structure of a single finger bone, can open up this whole rich tapestry of past lives, past behaviors, and the incredible branching possibilities of evolution. Makes you want to look closer at every fossil.
It certainly does. There are likely many more stories hidden within the bones.